Today, we're jumping right into one of the most powerful grassroots movements in American history, the Populist Uprising. It's an amazing story about how millions of everyday farmers stood up and challenged the incredible power of Gilded Age capitalism.
This quote from Populist leader Mary Elizabeth Lease, it just hits you, right? It perfectly captures how so many people felt. It was this deep-seated fear that the country they knew was being snatched right out from under them. And this wasn't just talk, it was a genuine cry from the heart of a nation in crisis.
So let's set the scene. What was really going on? Well, for American farmers in the late 1800s, this era of amazing industrial growth and massive fortunes for a few, what we call the Gilded Age, was, let's just say, anything but golden for them. Now, here's what's so wild about this. Farmers were the majority of the population, but they were losing their grip. You'd think that new technology and bigger markets would be a great thing, right? Well, not exactly. All that new efficiency meant they were producing way more crops, which totally crashed the prices. And at the same time, they were becoming completely dependent on faraway bankers for loans and on huge monopolistic railroads to even get their crops to market.
And this slide just lays it out, plain as day. The power imbalance was staggering. On one side, you've got the individual farmer, just sinking deeper and deeper into debt, feeling totally helpless. And on the other side, you've got these brand new industrial giants, the railroads, the big banks, that controlled the entire national economy. They were literally reshaping the country to benefit themselves.
So, when you're facing a force that massive, what do? Well, the farmers realized pretty quickly they couldn't fight alone. They had to organize. And that idea, it would spark a massive national movement.
And it all kicked off right here, with the Farmers Alliance. It started down in Texas with a simple but pretty radical idea. If big corporations can use their huge size to get what they want, why can't we farmers do the exact same thing?
And boy, did that idea take off. At its absolute peak, the Farmers Alliance had a mind-boggling 1.5 million members. Let that sink in. This wasn't some small fringe group. This was a true mass movement that spread like wildfire across the South and the Great Plains.
So how did they fight back? In some really practical, really smart ways. They set up cooperatives to share expensive machinery, they bargained together to get better prices, and get this, they even created their own media empire of over 1,000 newspapers so they could get their message out without going through the corporate press.
But this went deeper than just dollars and cents. The Alliance had this almost religious vision for what America could be. They called it a cooperative commonwealth, a society where the government would step up and protect regular people from what they saw as the greedy, predatory behavior of a tiny, wealthy elite.
Okay, so these cooperatives were a fantastic start, but the farmers quickly figured out that if they really wanted to change the system, they needed political power. And just like that, the movement evolved into a full-blown national political party.
And look how fast it all happened. In 1890, they have huge success just by backing certain candidates. 2 years later, they formed their own national party, the People's Party, who we call the Populists. And then, on the 4th of July, 1892, they dropped their revolutionary vision for America, the Omaha Platform.
This quote from the platform's introduction, written by Ignatius Donnelly, just cuts right to the bone, doesn't it? They truly believed that the whole system was rigged, that it was designed to funnel wealth from the people who actually did the work into the pockets of a few super-rich monopolists.
And their solutions. Wow. This was a truly radical blueprint for a new kind of America, and it was way ahead of its time. Nationalizing the railroads, that was a direct shot at corporate power. Monetizing silver to create inflation, a direct challenge to the banks. And a graduated income tax and the direct election of senators, these are ideas meant to fundamentally shift power back to the people.
So with a platform like that, the Populists didn't just step into the political ring, they kicked the door clean off its hinges. They created an absolute firestorm that threatened to completely upend the two-party system.
I mean, just look at this. In their very first presidential election in 1892, their guy, James Weaver, gets over 1 million popular votes and 22 electoral votes. For a third party to do that, it was absolutely stunning. It sent a massive shockwave through the political establishment.
And then, just as they were gaining steam, the whole economy just falls off a cliff. The Panic of 1893 triggered a horrific depression, the worst the country had ever seen. As people lost their jobs and their savings, the populist message, blaming the whole mess on greedy elites and corrupt politicians, started to sound more and more like the truth.
With the country in chaos and their message catching on, it really seemed like they were unstoppable. But
the movement had a fatal flaw. A huge internal problem it just couldn't solve. And that problem, especially in the South, was race.
This quote from a populist senator is, well, it's chilling, and it says it all. In the South, Democrats attacked the populists by viciously stoking racial fears, telling white voters the movement would lead to black rule. The populists had this incredible opportunity to build a powerful alliance between poor white and poor black farmers, which could have been unstoppable. But instead, many of their leaders caved. They were against the Democrats' corruption, sure, but they weren't willing to stand up against white supremacy itself. And that failure was ultimately fatal.
In the end, the People's Party itself didn't survive. But its impact, its ideas, well, they would echo for decades to come. This was, in so many ways, an unfinished revolution.
So what happened? Well, it was a mix of things. You had those internal divisions, like over race, and you just can't underestimate the raw power of the two major parties. The Democrats especially got pretty savvy and managed to adopt some of the populist issues and pull away many of their voters.
So, is that the end of the story? Was it all for nothing? Did the populist revolution just fizzle out? Not even close. And honestly, this is the most fascinating part of the whole story. Just look at this list. A graduated income tax, the direct election of senators, these things that were once considered totally radical populist demands, they became the 16th and 17th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So many of their core ideas were picked up by the progressive movement just a few years later and actually became law.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The People's Party may have lost the political battles, but in the long run, you could argue that their ideas, populism itself, actually won. They prove that even when you're up against incredible corporate and political power, a passionate, organized movement of everyday people can fundamentally change the national conversation. They can force a country to look in the mirror and reckon with its deepest problems. And that's a lesson that's just as powerful today as it was back in the Gilded Age.